The Punctiliousness of Don Sebastian by W. Somerset Maugham. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For further information or to volunteer, please go to LibriVox.org. Xiormenez is the most inaccessible place in Spain. Only one train arrives there in the course of the day, and that arrives at 2 o'clock in the morning. Only one train leaves it, and that starts an hour before sunrise. No one has ever been able to discover what happens to the railway officials during the intermediate 21 hours. A German painter I met there, who had come by the only train, and had been endeavouring for a fortnight to get up in time to go away, told me that he had frequently gone to the station in order to clear up the mystery, but had never been able to do so. Yet, from his inquiries, he was inclined to suspect, and that was as far as he would commit himself, being a cautious man, that they spent the time in eating garlic and smoking execrable cigarettes. The guide-books tell you that Xiormenez possesses the eyebrows of Joseph of Arimathea, a cathedral of the greatest quaintness, and battlements untouched since their erection in the 14th century, and they strongly advise you to visit it, but recommend you, before doing so, to add Keating's insect powder to your other toilet necessaries. I was travelling to Madrid in an express train which had been rushing along at the pace of 16 miles an hour, when suddenly it stopped. I leant out of the window, asking where we were. "Xiormenez," answered the guard. "I thought we did not stop at Xiormenez." "We do not stop at Xiormenez," he replied impassively. "But we are stopping now." "That may be, but we are going on again." I had already learnt that it was folly to argue with the Spanish guard, and drawing back my head, I sat down. But looking at my watch, I saw that it was only 10. I should never again have a chance of inspecting the eyebrows of Joseph of Arimathea, unless I chartered a special train. So, seizing the opportunity and my bag, I jumped out. The only porter told me that everyone in Xiormenez was asleep at that hour, and recommended me to spend the night in the waiting-room. But I bribed him heavily. I offered him 2 pesetas, which is nearly 15 pence, and leaving the train to its own devices, he shouldered my bag and started off. Along a stony road we walked into the dark night, the wind blowing cold and bitter, and the clouds chasing one another across the sky. In front I could see nothing but the porter, hurrying along, bent down under the weight of my bag. The wind blew icily. I buttoned up my coat, and then I regretted the warmth of the carriage, the comfort of my corner and my rug. I wished I had peacefully continued my journey to Madrid. I was on the verge of turning back as I heard the whistling of the train. I hesitated, but the porter hurried on, and fearing to lose him in the night, I sprang forwards. Then the puffing of the engine, and on the smoke the bright reflection of the furnace, and the train steamed away. Like Abd er-Rahman, I felt that I had flung my scabbard into the flames. Still the porter hurried on, bent down under the weight of my bag, and I saw no light in front of me to announce the approach to a town. On each side, bordering the road, were trees, and beyond them darkness, and great black clouds hastened after one another across the heavens. Then, as we walked along, we came to a rough stone cross, and lying on the steps before it was a woman with uplifted hands, and the wind blew bitter and keen, freezing the marrow of one's bones. What prayers had she to offer that she must kneel there alone in the night? We passed another cross, standing up with its outstretched arms like a soul in pain. At last a heavier night rose before me, and presently I saw a great stone arch. Passing beneath it, I found myself immediately in the town. The street was tortuous and narrow, paved with rough cobbles, and it rose steeply, so that the porter bent lower beneath his burden, panting. With the bag on his shoulders, he looked like some hunched-back gnome, a creature of nightmare. On either side rose tall houses, lying crooked and irregular, leaning towards one another at the top, so that one could not see the clouds, and their windows were great black apertures like giant mouths. There was not a light, not a soul, not a sound, except that of my own feet and the heavy panting of the porter. We wound through streets, round corners, through low arches, a long way up the steep cobbles, and suddenly down broken steps. They hurt my feet, and I stumbled and almost fell. But the hunchback walked along nimbly, hurrying ever. Then we came into an open space, and the wind caught us again and blew through our clothes, so that I shrank up, shivering. And never a soul did we see as we walked on. It might have been a city of the dead. Then past a tall church. I saw a carved porch, and from the side grim devils grinning down upon me. The porter dived through an arch, and I groped my way along a narrow passage. At length he stopped, and with a sigh threw down the bag. He beat with his fists upon an iron door, making the metal ring. A window above was thrown open, and a voice cried out. The porter answered. There was a clattering down the stairs, an unlocking, and the door was timidly held open, so that I saw a woman, with the light of her candle throwing a strange yellow glare on her face. And so I arrived at the hotel of Zyrmaneth. 2. My night was troubled by the ghostly crying of the watchman. "Protect us, Mary, Queen of Heaven, protect us, Mary." Every hour it rang out stridently, as soon as the heavy bells of the cathedral had ceased their clanging, and I thought of the woman kneeling at the cross, and wondered if her soul had found peace. In the morning I threw open the windows, and the sun came dancing in, flooding the room with gold. In front of me the great wall of the cathedral stood grim and grey, and the gargoyles looked savagely across the square. The cathedral is admirable. When you enter, you find yourself at once in darkness, and the air is heavy with incense. But as your eyes become accustomed to the gloom, you see the black forms of penitents, kneeling by pillars, looking towards an altar, and by the light of the painted windows a reredos, with the gaunt saints of an early painter, and aureoles shining dimly. But the gem of the cathedral of Zyrmaneth is the chapel of the Duke de Losas, containing, as it does, the alabaster monument of Don Sebastian Emmanuel de Mantona, Duke de Losas, and of the very illustrious Señora Doña Sodina de Veraguet, his wife. Like everything else in Spain, the chapel is kept locked up, and the guide-book tells you to apply to the porter at the palace of the present Duke. I sent a little boy to fetch that worthy, who presently came back, announcing that the porter and his wife had gone into the country for the day, but that the Duke was coming in person. And immediately I saw walking towards me a little dark man, wrapped up in a big cape, with the red and blue velvet of the lining flung gaudily over his shoulder. He bowed courteously as he approached, and I perceived that on the crown his hair was somewhat more than thin. I hesitated a little, rather awkwardly, for the guide-book said that the porter exacted a fee of 1 peseta for opening the chapel. One could scarcely offer 7 halfpenny to a duke, but he quickly put an end to all doubts, for as he unlocked the door he turned to me and said, "The fee is 1 franc." As I gave it him, he put it in his pocket, and gravely handed me a little printed receipt. Baedeker had obligingly informed me that the Duchy of Losas was shorn of its splendour, but I had not understood that the present representative added to his income by exhibiting the bones of his ancestors at a franc a head. We entered, and the Duke pointed out the groining on the roof and the tracery of the windows. "This chapel contains some of the finest Gothic in Spain," he said. When he considered that I had sufficiently admired the architecture, he turned to the pictures, and with the fluency of a professional guide, gave me their subjects and the names of the artists. "Now we come to the tombs of Don Sebastian, the first Duke of Losas, and his spouse, Doña Sodina, not, however, the first Duchess." The monument stood in the middle of the chapel.